I'm Barry Bruce, and my job on Mark Twain was as a character designer as well as lead animator on it. Although in those days there were few enough people in the studio that we all shared in a lot of the business that we were doing, set building and so forth. Yeah, well, we first started out just by gathering a lot of scrap, looking at Mark Twain books and the old classic illustrators of the books. Sort of gathered all those together and put those up on a board so we had those in our mind, read the material so that we knew kind of who Huck was supposed to be, who Tom was, all of that. Then also we had, when we were casting voice talent, we had to keep that in our minds also. And from there we started doing sketches. And we just did a wide range of sketches and would talk about them. Will and I would go back and forth over them and decide what was working, what wasn't working, think about how we wanted the film to work. So my specific role, in addition to doing character design, was being the lead animator. And part of what that entailed was I did almost all the animation on Twain, the two Twains, and I did most of the animation on Adam. But it also involved just thinking about how the characters were going to move. Before we got started, I would do 6, 7, 8 expression studies of each character. We would take, for instance, Mark Twain, and I would have a neutral expression where he's just flat, no expression at all. And that's usually, these heads were all molded. We had little rubber molds for them, which was a starting place for each character, so you didn't have to sculpt them from scratch. And those molds were mostly in that neutral expression. Then I would make a smiling, a genuine smile on a face. Then I might make a sort of sneering smile. It kind of depends on the character. Like with this guy, he's kind of such an irascible guy that he often had these squinty expressions. And so most everything I did with him in terms of expressions included that some way or other. With Becky Thatcher, they were all fresh, sort of clean, clear expressions. Some of the characters, the fantasy, like for instance the aliens in Captain Stormfield, those we were just trying to think of the oddest aliens we could make, and the idea of having 3 heads on them seemed fun when we came up with it, because then they could play against each other and it would be like a threesome talking, and a lot of gags coming out of that. And we would just look for things that were fun to see in animation, and also things that weren't incredibly time consuming. There was a good payoff in terms of time spent. Like with the aliens again, the snail tails were easy to do with replacements and a fun way to see them move. With the realistic characters, we held back on the cartooniness there quite a bit, and we really let the voice talents carry those, because we were shooting reference film of those voice talents while they were being recorded. And they were just dynamite people. They not only had really good voices, but they had great expressions. So, for instance, John Morrison, who did Adam, he just had a great range of expressions, and he was so much fun to watch. And so, when I was animating him, I would just watch for those expressions, and when I could see that one of them was going to come up, we would just exaggerate those, kind of take them about 50, 100% over what he was doing. And for some reason, film sort of compresses that exaggeration. So it would feel exaggerated, but not as wildly as we were actually doing it. When I look back at all the films we did from the early days on up through Twain, all of those we used exclusively clay, or almost exclusively clay to do it. And at the time, I don't know if I ever asked myself why we were doing it. It just seemed natural to be doing it that way. Plus also it just seemed like when I thought about using other materials, it opened things up too much. It seemed like I liked that limited palette of having everything be clay. For one thing, it all sort of lived together in terms of the color tones that you got out of it, just the way the materials reflected. But also the thing that I think was the greatest reward of doing that was that it forced us to stylize things. For instance, water. We didn't try to mimic everything about water. We didn't try to make it reflect, although in some cases with Eve, we have a clay painted reflection of her. But we would do things with clay, like just putting ripples of rolled up little clay snakes that would go out when something dropped into the water. We would move it with our hands in between frames, so there was a rippling to it. And what came out of that kind of stylization, I think, is a really pleasing reminder of water and how it acts, and at the same time, it's reminding you that it isn't water. And I think for audiences, that's a really fun thing to watch. So in the case of Twain, we could use the mustache to hide some of the seams that we'd have, because we would be replacing the jaw with other jaws if mouth was wide open, or if it was closed very tightly, or sometimes we would just be pivoting the jaw. But we'd have to clean up the seams from the corners of the mouth back to the ear where the jaw replacements came together. So by having 10 or 12 or 14 different mustaches, depending on the mouth position, I would just pop them in. That would be the very last thing I do in the scene, is to set those in, and they would cover up most of the problems. Plus, it made a fun kind of caricature. So the mustaches just thrash around below their noses in a funny way. The nice thing about a small team was that we all got to do lots of different jobs. When I wasn't building a character in pre-production, we would work together on sets if there was a set that needed a lot of work to be done. With Will, he was really open to lots of story ideas. We would have lots of story meetings previous to going into the film, and go over each scene, talk about how we could pump it up, what the point of the scene was, and come up with the very best ideas for it that we could. When we actually got into animation, the way it worked was, with all the animators, we would sit down with Will at the flatbed editing machine, and we would review the reference film, which we had shot, which had been cut to length like an animatic. And Will would go over what it was that had to happen in the scene, the story points that needed to be covered, stage direction, all of the things, mechanical things we had to remember. And then we would just talk about what the emotional points in the scene were. Sometimes we would go over some of the lip sync and do a little bit of logging on it. As the film progressed, a lot of times the animators would do their own lip sync logging as we went along. But there was always a meeting ahead of time with Will as the director. And then Will let us perform like actors when we were out on the set. One of the things about Adam and Eve, getting back to just stylization, it's one of the hardest things to do in clay is to walk characters, simply because the clay is really heavy. It's very hard to get a leg up gracefully off the ground without the character tipping over. So sometimes you may see us sliding the character's feet a little bit to avoid that. With Adam and Eve, I just didn't want to, I thought, well, I'm going to try and come up with a way that we just stylize a walk. So it's obvious we're not trying to mimic a real walk, that it's just a stylization of that. So we didn't do this with Twain, but as an example, with Adam, we had a little seam around his waist and that he could swivel on. There was a pin in there, and it's right at the top of his shorts. And then at the bottom leg of each of his shorts, it stopped, and there was a pin that came from the leg, so they could swivel too. So basically, we just moved him forward like this, but since we could correct his upper body stayed straight, and he just kind of waddled along, and it was kind of a funny look, and it was much easier to do than to try to do a real walk. And I think more humorous. In the long run, I think it was better than if we had achieved a real walk, because the most you get if you get a really very realistic walk is the audience goes, oh, they're walking. And or if you even notice it. But if you stylize it in a funny way, then the audience takes notice of it, enjoys it, and you get more out of it than just mimicking reality. So one of my favorite parts of the film that I animated was The Mysterious Stranger. I think I liked it because I liked the idea of the mask that was separate from a face, and there was no head at all, and the mask became the head for the character. And I liked playing with moving it away a little bit from where a head would actually be. So you got that tension of how far can it go before it breaks away from the body and doesn't seem like it's associated with it. So I like that tension. And I also just, ever since I saw Closed Mondays, which I didn't work on that film, but when I saw it, one of the things I liked about it was metamorphosis. And that's kind of one of the reasons I got into clay animation, was I liked that. So on The Mysterious Stranger, I liked including metamorphosis with that, where he's first the angel face, then it becomes Twain's face, then it becomes the devil's, and it's Death's face at the end. So that was a lot of fun to animate. The things I liked most about the film, I mean, to begin with, the thing was the people on the film. As we talked earlier, it was just a great experience to work with that team. But the other thing I liked, in pre-production, as well as I guess in production a little bit, I really enjoyed the technical aspect of animation. I liked coming up with armatures that would really sell the scene and work for the animators, and at the same time be relatively invisible to any viewers. With animation, you're always there's a dozen tricks going on, like a magician. You got tricks going on all the time, but you don't want your audience to see those tricks. And it was really fun coming up with those tricks. For instance, when a small one of those tricks, when the stranger comes in on the Calaveras frog scene, pushing the wheelbarrow, we found that it was just almost impossible to get a character to walk and push a wheelbarrow all at the same time and get them back on the set without them just being completely torn to pieces. And so the idea that I came up with for that was that instead of having a character with hands and a wheelbarrow, what we had was a wheelbarrow with hands on it and the character with no hands. So we could move the wheelbarrow forward, the hands would move with it. And then when we walked the character forward, we had the wheelbarrow with its hands as registration points to meet the arm, so that the arms of the stranger would meet up with that. For me, that was really satisfying, coming up with a little trick that's completely invisible to the audience, but made it possible to animate the scene.